Welcome to the Existential Empath Podcast. My name is Tanya, and I am an intuitive empath. My intention is to share valuable tips, tools, and techniques that I have learned so you can tap into your own inner healer naturally and intuitively. Welcome back, everyone. Today I have guest Tim Bui. Tim is a life mastery coach focused on helping people live in the flow state by facilitating alignment, creating a vision, and setting easily attainable goals. Tim brings the value of embodied teachings, the philosophies of the East, along with his personal experiences to his coaching practice. Tim is also an experienced martial arts teacher and serial entrepreneur. Welcome, Tim. It's a pleasure to have you on the show today.
Thank you, Tanya. I always, whenever people introduce me, I'm like, oh man, they're just so long. It's like, like the Herald, and there's like and he the fifth, and his father the seventh, and that's what it feels like. But thank you so
You're
much.
Welcome. That was actually a short introduction. Some of mine are a little longer than that, so it was funny that you thought that was long. But I'm excited for our show today. I know I think you reached out to me a week or two ago, and I had a cancellation today, and I thought, oh, I'm so glad I can get Tim on the show today because I've been wanting to talk about this topic for a while, and we're going to dive into what it means to truly live in the flow state. And so, Tim, first though, I want to start off with an understanding of what it truly means to live in the flow state, right? We hear that term quite often, and not everyone consciously comprehends, even me, including myself sometimes, what it means to live divinely guided in the flow. And so as a flow state coach, you're probably the best one to explain this. Can you actually explain what it means from your perspective to live in the flow?
Yeah, I think definitions are always a great place to start. So I love this question. So I think there's just two fundamental components of flow. Like one is you lose track of time, and the other is you lose track of self. And I think that why it's important is because like you don't always need yourself. You don't need to bring yourself everywhere with you. It's amazing to lose ourselves because like say like you're dancing or I don't know what are your hobbies? You like hiking, okay, getting lost in nature, right? And
yes,
so like
and you lose track of time. Yes,
and so like you don't need to like think about like all the things that you're worried about and all the like the critical thoughts and like what Susie's doing, if Susie still likes you, what your mom's doing, like no, you don't need to bring any of those things. And that's what like going into flow is that like you don't bring any of the unnecessary things with you on your little journey of whatever it is that you're doing, and you're free to completely be present in the thing that you're fully engaged in. And that full level of activation of your mind, it's like there's been studies that show that it's higher on the satisfactory, like self-reported satisfactory than pleasure. So it's a really good indicator of like how often you're in flow is a really good indicator of how well you are doing. So it's
very interesting. Back in the day, I used to be a baller. I played basketball. I played in college, and I called the flow state at that time the zone. When I would get into the zone, I would just every time I'd throw that ball up, it went in the hoop, and so that was probably my first real indication of what it felt like to be in the flow state. It was just no matter what I did, everything was working out for me. I always had a positive outcome. And so I can see where that you just feel on top of the world when you're in that flow state, and everything comes very easily and effortlessly to you, right?
Yes. Oh my gosh, I'm so glad you brought the athletic example. I think a lot of people connect with being an athlete too, and being in the zone. And I think that's a really good way because like in a team sport like basketball, there's also like a group flow, right? So if the rule is, I don't know, if everybody has different rules, but if your offensive rule is like every 2 beats, you have to pass the ball or shoot it, then like everybody's kind of clued in that. And like you guys work as a unit. And so like you can look at synchronized swimming, it's like everybody's in flow, and same thing like SEAL teams and whatever, right? So like there's many different types of flow. And it really comes down to like the patterning that we set up for ourselves and like how we work within that pattern, and then how we develop that pattern into a flow, like music.
Yes, absolutely. It's like, when you're on that team and you're all on the same frequency, you're all on the same vibe, and you can feel it. You're like, oh, this just feels amazing. And so, Tim, you've been living in the flow state for most of your life. I actually listened to your story on a recent podcast, and I was quite
Oh,
inspired
nice.
on how you've created balance and prosperity in your life by exploring many different paths, many different career paths. And I think even in your story, you said, I thought about going to college and then I decided not to. It just wasn't cost effective for me. And I thought that is so cool. And so can you share a little, because it kind of breaks the mold, right? I'm all about bucking the system. I think that's really cool that you decided to pave your own path and you were following your flow, right? And so can you share with us a little bit about your story and how living in the flow state has benefited you in your life?
Yeah, of course. My story with flow is it's a really interesting one because it started when I was really young. I I got a glimpse of it, just a small glimpse of eternity in a meditation. And I was like 12. I was just trying to figure out like how to meditate, and I was just
You were
got
young trying
lucky.
to figure out how to meditate. I don't think the word meditation was in my wheelhouse when I was 12.
Yeah, and I think like for back then, especially too, like, but nowadays I feel like it's more of a thing, and people are meditating more. Thank goodness. But yeah, so I was just like self-taught Google, and I went to this transcendent state basically after practicing this style of meditation a couple of times. And one of the things that I experienced was flow state. So I was had this transcendent experience where it felt eternal, and like to describe how it feels to feel eternal is very difficult.
I know. I was going to say, how does that feel to feel
it,
eternal?
I felt outside of time. I felt connected to this like primordial state of being. And
Kind of reminds me of how some of the near-death experiencers talk about
it's
that.
exactly what it is. It's the same thing. It's pretty much the same thing, maybe slightly different in, degrees, but it's very much the same experience where you're outside of time. And I had never had that experience before. And it was just on such a deep level that, so I've talked to some people who they go on like float tanks and they have like similar experiences, but they'll kind of get shocked out of it. They're like, oh, like they woke up from a nightmare or something.
Yeah, you
And
have your 30 minutes of floating and then you wake up.
yeah, and so like I think there's definitely something that happened in that experience where I realized that there's a lot more than what I've been told about life and how to experience life. And so from that point on, I pretty much made a commitment to explore like my own version of life. Because and after that, nothing made sense to me, like going to school and hanging out with kids and pushing a ball around at recess or whatever. Like none of those things it was all just so mundane. And that became really troubling for me actually, because I started becoming disengaged with things. And so the story with flow is to find meaning in everything. And when you create meaning in things, then you can go into flow, because if they don't mean anything to you, then you have no relationship with it. And without a relationship with it, then there's no feedback. And the important thing for flow is that you have feedback, is that like you have a constant measure of how well things are going so that you can stay within that groove, that sweet spot. And so when it came to something like sweeping or like washing a car or buffing out the wax or whatever, like all these things now were ways for me to learn how to access flow better. And so they were just vehicles. Everything became a vehicle for flow until basically life was just flow. And so that was pretty much the shortest version of how I could explain this.
That's pretty deep. I mean, that's awesome though. I mean, to know that you experienced this at such a young age. And I see that with kids, that they're disconnecting from school. They're disconnecting from what we've been taught as a society is the path, right? And so it's really neat to hear, your story on how you started to explore a new path. And I think you talked about how you just kind of bounced around into different careers like finance and different, avenues. And you were like, okay, I'm going to dabble in this a little bit. I'm going to dabble in this a little bit. And not everybody has the courage to do that. And I know you have a martial arts background. So how much do you think that martial arts background played a role in you having the courage or the fearlessness to actually step out and live your life in the flow? Because I think a lot of us, we are afraid to do that because it appears to be different, right? It appears to go against the grain of what many of us have been told to do, or is told what society tells us to do.
Yeah, I think my parents put me into martial arts as a response to me being bullied as a kid. And I had a really like a gallbladder surgery when I was like 6 or something. So I feel like, it took a lot of vitality out of me. And so I was always very small. I was like 4'11" in my freshman year of high school.
Oh my goodness.
And then I grew like a foot after like, my junior year or something. And then I also have this like arm that's completely red.
Oh,
and
wow.
So it's just, I feel like I was a marker for being bullied. Basically, I just, I grew up in a very suburban area where there's not a lot of other ethnicities, other than just, I guess the Caucasian and African American. So I just stood out a lot, just in a lot of ways. Even right now, I'm kind of standing out with this nail thing that I've got going on. But yeah, so I think always being different and then having that transcendental experience really, it forced me to figure out my own way a lot of times. I'm also left-handed, so I always had to like learn how to just cut paper or write, and like the teacher would say to do it this way, and like I kind of have to figure out my own way because they're also not left-handed. And so I feel like in a way I was marked for a different path, but I also think that part of my personality, like I don't know if you've heard of the Enneagram.
Yeah.
But yeah, so like I'm an 8, and I think it's just like a response.
I'm an 8 too. I just found that out recently as well. Leaders. Yeah. Infinity.
Oh my goodness. Yes. And my birthday is, I don't know if I should say this publicly, but it's 8888. So it's all 8s. And then so like there's just like a lot of 8s in my life. And
that is cool.
And I think like part of like being an 8, like, well, I think like how the Enneagram works is that like it's based on a core wound, right? And there's supposedly 9 different types of core wounds. And so the core wound of being an 8 is being powerless. And I think one of the things that shaped my identity growing up, or like the ego, or sort of this core wound that I had, was feeling like my parents weren't there for me. And I think having that experience meant that I would have to take care of myself, and I would have to figure out things by myself. And I think that's part of, I think, what shaped this path of many different paths, and I guess not being too concerned about what other people think.
Yeah, and that's tough. I think a lot of us have gone through that. I know I did. I feel like the black sheep in my family, and I have for a really long time. And I've always been the lone wolf. I moved across the country by myself. I moved from
That's so cool.
Yeah, I moved from New York to Florida when I was 19 and lived there. And then I moved from Florida to the Pacific Northwest. I've traveled to nearly 50 countries, alone and with a friend. And so, I think I was talking to my neighbor the other day, and he's like, "You're quite adventurous." And I looked at it as, not really. I think I'm just living my life. But I guess to some that does look quite adventurous. But to us as 8s, right, we are like, all right, we're going to go, we're here for a certain amount of time, and we're going to go explore and live our lives the best way we can. And so, Tim, for people who may have a difficult time getting into that sweet spot that you talked about, that flow state, what is some advice that you can share with people who might be struggling? They might feel a little restricted in, the way that they're living their lives.
Yeah, I love that question because it gives people more access to flow. And I think, it goes back to what I shared earlier about meaning. And meaning comes from our values, and it also comes from our vision. So having a vision of, how we fit in the world and what our value system is. Because when you're clear on your values, then you can see that you're always deriving meaning from every experience just based on what your values are. And so, if your value is fun, then like you find a way to have fun in everything. Or if your value is wisdom, then you find a way to like have that experience inform you of some type of insight that's, deeper than what other people wouldn't. So like if you have these sort of North Stars or these little points to factors of experience, then it can really help to give you clarity on exactly where you're at in this point in time in your life and where your mind should be. And I think just having that level of presence really will allow us to connect into flow.
Yeah, and you can feel that alignment too. If your
Mm-hmm.
value is fun and you're following your fun, you'll naturally align with the things that are meant to be there with you, because you're in that flow state. And so, Tim, why do you think it's so difficult for some people to get into that flow state? I've worked with clients before and they're like, I don't even know if I felt that before. I don't even know if I felt what you talk about, it being in the sweet spot or being in the zone. Why do you think some people struggle with that?
I think a good example might be, okay, so you're driving on a freeway and somebody cuts you off really last minute and you have like a nanosecond to respond. So this breaks your concentration, whatever you're thinking about. And then like, you have to just pump on the brake. And now you're in fight or flight and you're freaking out. And you're like, maybe you might be saying some things about this driver who's done this to you.
If you have time in that nanosecond.
Yeah. There's just so much happening, right? And it just takes you out of the moment. And I think when we have critical thoughts or automatic negative thoughts or like self-recursive thoughts about who we are, or in a negative sense of what's going on in the situation, it takes us out of our train of thought, out of the present moment, puts us into fight or flight. And then by doing that, we are disconnected from the flow of what it is that we're doing, from the flow of our thought, from the flow of our mind, from the flow of our body. And I think that a lot of people haven't addressed the root causes of these, we can just call them automatic negative thoughts for now. And so since they're just like going on throughout the day, from the moment you wake up to the moment you go to sleep, it's really hard to find flow, to find this evenness. Some people find it, just by working out, and like that's their temple for like 1 hour. It's just like they just work out or something like that. And so I think it is possible to find it in spurts, especially if you're fully engaged in the thing that you're doing. I just think that oftentimes, like when it comes to work or family or just relaxing, it's sometimes it can be hard for people if there are like still like even like just traumatic events, that just get triggered, just micro things that like getting cut off in traffic or something like that.
Yeah. And, I think too, I work a lot with that as well, working with the subconscious mind and our belief systems and our patterns and our programs. And, many people, including myself for a while, wasn't really consciously aware of what my thought pattern was. And, if we've done it for so long, we just keep going back to it, on autopilot. And so, I want to talk a little bit about that, Tim. What is, our self-concept and how that creates our reality? Because I think this plays a big role in how we consciously can align ourselves with the flow state. Because it's not like, we all know there's times when you feel like, oh, I feel like I'm in the flow, this feels amazing. And then there's times when you're out of alignment. But how can we consciously recognize when we're out of alignment and then move ourselves back in based off of our own self-concept of what's going on, in our reality? So can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So I think like one of the things that we subconsciously do is we try to be consistent with what we have said before and our actions of the past and our memory of ourselves. And all these things are not permanent. They're, you could pick like 10 different types of memories, unconsciously, and you could say that's who I am, or you can just stick to the ones that you've been saying. And so I think like a good example is the people who don't think that they're funny, but like I think everybody is funny in their own way, though, right? Like you might not be Dave Chappelle or you might not be Joe Rogan, but like everybody's just funny in our own peculiar little ways. And so the people stick to these more negative memories, like when they try to make a joke and nobody laughed, or when somebody said you're not funny, or whatever the case is. And so those negative things have a lot more weight in their identity, or in our identity, I could say. And so we tend to stick to those types of themes more of things that we are not versus things that we are. And I think it's really going to your question is it's really up to us to define ourselves and not really let it be defined by other people and how other people perceive us, because also how other people perceive us in one part is due to their projections of like what they're used to seeing. And another part is because of the ways that we're like, I believe that is a personal belief, but we teach everybody how to treat us. And if we have certain beliefs about ourselves, then we're also in a way, by extension, teaching people to treat us this way based on how we self-identify. And so I think the way out of that is just figure out like who we want to be in this world, and what would be meaningful, what would be impactful for us based on who we believe we are, what we have to offer. And I think that's a really big question. So like just pushing it back down maybe a little bit is like just checking in to see where we're feeling about things on a day-to-day basis, on a moment-to-moment basis, whenever we can remember, just maybe like putting a hand over your heart and like, how do you feel right now? And like one of the things that I do very often with, especially with myself, but like with clients and with friends and stuff like that, I just check in. Like I'm just doing energy check-in. Like, where are you at quantitatively? Like 1 to 10. 1 is like you're falling asleep at the wheel. I don't know why you still be driving references. 10 is like you're ready to like blast through the wall next to you. You just have so much energy. And so like quantitatively, that can tell us something about what we're doing in this moment, or maybe something that we did prior to this moment that led us to this level of energy, whether it's like eating too much potatoes for lunch or just hanging out with your kids. And then quantitatively, what is your energetic state? Like, are you really happy? Are you optimistic? Are you depressed? Are you sad? And like just kind of figuring out where you're at right now and just getting a temperature check. And I think the more that often that we can do that, then we can start to get these patterns of, okay, I feel best when I'm doing these things and I feel worse when I'm doing these things. Okay, so let's now do more of those things that make us feel amazing and less of those things that don't, and just figuring out the math from there on how we can make that happen in our lives.
Yeah. And that's powerful, because it sounds like that's what you've been doing in your life. You're like, all right, I'm not enjoying this job anymore, and I'm going to start maybe exploring something else that makes me feel better. And I was just watching a reel, and it had the Generation X, the boomers, the millennials, and and the millennials were like, no, I don't want this, I'm going to go find a new job. It was like a joke. And but I see a lot of the millennials are living in the flow state, that I can sense that they are picking up on the energy of, this doesn't feel right to me. I don't want to be restricted in this anymore. And many of them you can see them, they're making millions of dollars, starting their own businesses and paving their own way. Where then my generation was a little different than that. It was like, this loyalty that, I have to work at this job for 20 years because I feel loyal. And we're starting to shift in the way that we function in society, the way that we value our time and value what we're doing and living in the flow. And so I think that's important, because many of us, like myself, I'm learning how to do that now. I'm learning how to live in that flow and learning how to even kind of self-reflect and see what is my sense of self, what is my identity. Was my identity created when I was a child from my parents, and then now I'm I was walking down that path, and then you wake up and you turn 40 and you're like, who am I? Like, this isn't what I want anymore. And so I think no matter what age you're at, but I do see the younger generations just naturally doing this, and we can learn, us older generations can learn from the younger generations that, gosh, they live based off of more of that flow state. And that's powerful, because they're living from their hearts oftentimes. And I've been living from my mind from a really long time, and just I know you do transcendental meditation, and I do as well. And just learning that mind heart coherence and tuning into that more, and following those inspired actions. And so you with your martial arts background, I can only keep thinking of Karate Kid. I mean, you see
Yeah.
Danielson, and this is the original movie, back when I was a kid, when it came
Yeah.
out, and he wasn't a martial artist in the beginning of the movie. He didn't even know what that was. But by the end of the movie, he's winning, and he's got all of these, wax on, wax off, all these basic concepts. And he can naturally do moves and positions that became autopilot for him because he had practiced them.
Yeah, the muscle memory.
Yeah, the muscle memory. So I think a lot of that, what you talked about, is how we're on that autopilot. When you're driving and then something happens, we have that muscle memory. And many of us have to kind of reprogram that, because it might not be a healthy muscle memory that we have.
Yes.
Thought, right?
Yes. And the muscle memory can be emotional too, right? Like it could be like just as soon as you see something, it disgusts you, right? Or like you feel shameful about it. Mm-hmm. And just taking note of those things. I think oftentimes we want to avoid feeling that way about something or towards ourselves. And so like, as soon as you feel it, you just try to like turn it off somewhere, or like you just try to distract yourself, or you feel something in your body and then you're like, oh, let me just do something instead. Like maybe just write down something about it and then explore it later on in the evening or something like that, to give yourself the space to really see what's there, because that's your body is trying to tell you something in that moment.
Absolutely. And so, Tim, you talk a lot about being a high performance human. Can you share, what does that mean? And you talk about biohacking and all these different concepts. And can you dive into that a little bit?
Yeah, of course. I think, why I think about a high performance human is because I think we have peak performance states. So I think that there are times when we perform better than other times. And I think it's context dependent as well. And so there's two factors, right? Like one is the peak performance state, and then the other is being context dependent. And I think that it's possible that we maintain a high level of peak performance, or like our peak performance state in general. And I think it's also possible that we go across many different contexts and we just stay in flow state, or we stay in this high peak state. And that has to do with the resonance that you're talking about, right? So like your mind, your brain, your heart, your soul, if you have one, all of it is aligned and it's all resonating, and it's all in integration with what it is that you're doing at that present moment. And I think that there's no capacity to being a human. There's no limitation. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so I think, being a high performance human is just constantly exploring that edge, that as soon as you take a step, more is shown to you. Like there's a fog maybe, and every step you take, you can see more and more potential and more for the world. And so I just think that that is a possibility. That's a possibility that I live in. And I think that that's a possibility that I believe that other people can share. And I have seen that in my work. So I wanted to keep it human, because I didn't want it to be like male or woman or, this or that. It's just, we're all human and we all have this within our DNA. So
absolutely. And it's consciously tapping into that. And I think there's different levels to that. It's like, how you've explored different career paths and I've explored different traveling. I think when I started to travel the world is when my consciousness really expanded. I was able to see different cultures and try different things. And it really took me out of my comfort zone, and out of a box. I mean, I've been to Russia, I've been to Turkey, I've been to all these places where some people might be fearful to visit. I had beautiful experiences with people there. And, so I think too, oftentimes we can limit ourselves to not be that high performing human because of fear and things that may hold us back, right?
Yeah, I love that you said that travel took you out of your box, because I think when that box is too small, then it's hard to get into flow, because like the context of which you can be in flow is very constrained. And so I think one of the beautiful things about traveling is that culture shock. It forces your mind to expand, and like so like now you're like. A good question that somebody always asks is, my friend, I guess, is like, how close do you stand to somebody at the funeral? And that's very context dependent, right? Like on how close you are to this person, what country you're in, like, all like the religion and all these things, right? And so like how close you stand to somebody at a funeral is going to be different in every country that you go to. But like not just at a funeral, but like just in the city, in the streets, like how close do you stand? Like where do you make eye contact? Do you smile? All these things, like you can just open up these zones of knowing, this implicit learning. And the implicit learning is where the flow happens. It's like you're not trying to learn, it's just happening on its own. And so I think that's a really good avenue, like either, you know, obviously physically traveling or just doing psychedelics or something. But that's a whole different call, like responsibly.
Yeah. And a lot of it too is when you're doing those things, your conscious mind is being distracted, right? So when you're traveling, you're looking at things you haven't seen before, and your conscious mind is very distracted with that, where then your subconscious just kicks in naturally and you become organically in flow. And, you know, I think that's why we feel so good when we travel. I know I would travel for 2 or 3 weeks at a time when I would go, you know, overseas, and I felt like $1 million when I came back. You know, it was just like, oh, I got to taste new foods and meet new people and see new cultures and try new things and, you know, see new scenery. And it just was so fascinating for me. And I would even have a hard time for me, you know, like my family, they don't travel very much. And I'm like, you guys, you got to get out there and see the world. But I do recognize that we all find our flow in different ways. Like my sister likes to read books, and that's how she finds her flow. That's how she learns about things. And my parents like to watch, you know, the History Channel with all these different, you know, shows about travel and whatnot. So that's their escape. That's their way to find it. So not all of us are kind of wired or programmed to literally jump on a plane and, you know, go to Thailand or, you know, whatnot. Some people want to watch it on TV, right?
That level of novelty is, I think, disconcerting for some people, I think.
Exactly.
But as soon as you break that bubble, I think it's in a positive way though, right? Like, cause a lot of times we travel somewhere and like, we're like, why do they, you know, wait in line like this? Or, you know, like, and then there's sort of a resistance to accepting, you know, what's different about this country or about these people. Like, why do they drive on the side of the road? It makes no sense, you know? And like, so I think if they have a positive experience that, you know, while they're traveling, it'll definitely open that bubble up. But yeah, it depends on those automatic negative thoughts. How often do they come in? They ruin things. So
it does. You're right. And I had a friend, I was doing all this traveling, and she's like, Tanya, I was in the military. And she goes, and I'm terrified to get on a plane. And I'm like, you know, in the military, she was a Marine. She was traveling all over the place, Japan and, you know, everywhere. But she had this fear of getting on a plane. And I said, this is holding you back from seeing the world. And so I did a little work with her at the time of overcoming that fear. And now you can't even keep her in one city. I mean, she's just all over the place. Right now, she's in Amsterdam. She's got a trip to South Africa. And I joke with her. I'm like, remember that time when you told me, I don't think I can travel to Europe because I'm afraid to get on a plane. She was able to overcome that. And now she's probably going on about 60 different countries that she's visited since that.
Oh my goodness. That's so exciting.
It's so neat, but it's really neat to see her, you know, having no fear. And her daughter lives overseas and she has a granddaughter now. So she has to go, and she's on a plane more than she's in a car. And I was joking, you know, with her. So I think when we can consciously shine light on what we fear, we can overcome that. And then that will naturally put us in the flow state of where we're meant to be. At least that's been my experience.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I think fear is just that uncomfortability with the unknown. And I think the more that we make the unknown known, the less fear it will have.
I agree. And so, Tim, this has been such a fun conversation. And I want you to talk a little bit more about some of the services that you provide as a life mastery coach and how you help people attain those goals and overcome those fears so that they can live in a state of flow.
Yeah, I think like the most fun I have is just, you know, working with people one-on-one. But I try to put out as much stuff as I can for free. I'm working on I'm working on a book that I'll put out for free. I'm putting out some exercises, some like worksheets and things like that to help people get into flow. Because I really want it to be as accessible to people as possible. I know like depression and things like that is increasing. I think it's like 1 out of 4 people are depressed in this country right now. So I just think that like if there's more accessibility to flow, then I think it'll unlock different levels for our society, you know, of creativity, of innovation, of cooperation, of togetherness. And so I think that there's so much to gain from that. and I don't want to like hold that back. So I'm just doing whatever I can. But I do one-on-one work, and like you said, a lot of it is some subconscious things. I think because I have a lot of direct experience with looking behind the curtain. That's what I call meditation, right? It's just like looking behind the curtain, and the longer you stay back there, the more stuff you can take from behind the curtain and bring it back to the forefront of the world through our mind, right? And so I'm pretty astute. I think when I work one on one, it's just basically we have my 2 3 hour sessions, and then we have it's only a 6 week program, and after 6 weeks, you're we basically break people out of being feeling like their goals are difficult or they're misaligned with what it is that they want in life, feeling burnt out from work, from family, feeling stressed.
Things that block.
So all these, yes, we're just basically, I call it clear for flow. And so in 6 weeks, we're clearing for flow. So we just take you to ground zero. We figure out like what the root causes are. I'm really good at that. I think that's one of my gifts. And so that's why I decided to do this, is because I'm really good at listening. And
do you have a testimonial that you could share of someone who's gone through your program that you just saw the floodgates opened up with flow after they, got finished working with you?
Yeah, of course. I love all my testimonials so much. They like, just like when you said you were talking about your client, I could feel that level of like, you're just so pumped for them. And I feel that way about when I think about my clients too. And so
it's fun to see people succeed,
Yeah. So I was on this hike it's been 2 weeks already. And I was in a hot springs, and interestingly, it was a nude hot spring. I was not aware.
Any hot spring is awesome, right?
No, I would have robe. So anyway, I had a client who's like, "Hey, I want to." After 6 weeks, I'm like, I'll let go. So it's been a while. It's been 5 or 6 months, but then he wanted to get in contact with me. He's like, "Hey, I want to get on call with you." So I was like, I love you, so I'll do this, but I have to hike like 20 minutes to get this cell reception to see you right now. And so I do the hike, and then he calls me, and he's like, "This month I just had a $500,000 month."
Oh.
And yeah. And before story is he, was in a real estate syndication, and they were like doing a lot of investments and stuff like that, and storage units and things like that. And basically, his partner at the time left to Mexico, took all the money, and left him with the payroll expenses and just everything. And it was just a terrible situation about 2 years ago, or 2.5 years ago. And then his daughter was born like 6 months after that. And so like, there's just so much going on. And he had a lot of doubt about like his ability to provide for his family and whether he was a good father or not. And he was working both ends of the candle, just trying to scrape like 2,000, 5,000, 3,000, just like, anything that he could. And we had our sessions, and we let go of a lot of that stuff. Just those things, just those fears, those doubts about being a good father, about like being able to produce that amount of money that he had before. And he just texted me yesterday. He said that they had their second day in a row of a $70,000 day. And so he's making he's breaking records like all the time. I don't want to say almost every day, but it's very often. Yeah. And so like, I'm just so excited for him, because now he wants to retire and take his family to Cambodia and, in a couple of years. And he's 33% partner of the company when he was 0. And so like, there's just so much happening for him. And
he just got his power back, is what it sounds like.
And he says that one of the things that he tells people is like, he just woke up like this. And that's part of like what we do, is that like, it's not something like that you have to change about yourself. It's just as natural as success just becomes natural. And because you have a map, because you're aligned, because you understand exactly your role and how you fit in the world and your vision, you just naturally go for it. It's just like when you're on a railroad track and you're just going, like, you don't have to think about going left or right. Like, you just create the energy and you go down that railroad track. And so he just tells people, yeah, I just woke up like this. And, but then he also tells them like, contact my friend or whatever. But,
I woke up like this, but call my friend. This is how I got here.
Yeah. So like, He just says that it's been effortless. And I think that one of the things that we do in life is we create this modifier that there's the easy, hard, and things are not enjoyable if they're hard, or I mean, if they're easy, or like if it's easy, we don't want it. And they're just ridiculous. It's like, you can have so much in your life if you just allow it to be easy, and you can have even more. And so like the hardness should not come from like the level of satisfaction that you feel for yourself, but it should come from like the levels of achievement that you have for the world. And like, I think like that is where the hardness should come from. But yeah, so I think it's really easy to really make our dreams happen and be purpose driven in this world. I think it just really comes down to having the right map and being aligned to that on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, that's beautiful. That's awesome. It's just really, I think one of the hardest, I think one of my challenges was just trying to figure out what did I enjoy doing that I was good at, that I could, be in the flow state and just have things naturally attune. And you and I talked about this before we started recording. You're like, what was your motive behind the podcast? And how I shared that I'm a good speaker. I love to communicate with other people. I love to have that connection. And so I call myself the quantum connector. And I just have this knack I meet people randomly, and it's like I put a little file in my subconscious, and then I meet another person and I immediately know I need to connect these people. And I'm really good at that. And it comes really naturally to me. And I think a challenge for most of us is figuring out what that is. And it doesn't have to be hard. For me, networking, it just comes naturally, very easy. But for some people, they may say, I am a terrible networker. I'm not good at that, but I'm darn good. I'm a darn good accountant, and I can really work really well with money, So it's just figuring out what comes organically to you, and then, figuring out how to piece it together so you can live in that flow state. And Tim, this has been such a fun talk. I feel like I could talk to you for hours on this topic. And so where's a good place for people to connect with you? Do you have a website, or how can people reach out?
Yeah, I have a website. I'm working on shortening the URL because right now it's my name, Tim Bui, and then / high performance humans. And so I'm working on shortening that. But in the meantime, people can always visit my Instagram, and there's a link tree there where they can get, if I ever update things, it's always on the link tree. So right now I have a free, I think it's 8 weeks of breathwork training on there. So that'll teach you basically how to expand your zone of comfort and basically like deprogram a lot of the fight or flight responses that you have to everyday things. And so by doing that, that will allow you to access more flow, and it's completely free. And then there's, other free things on my link tree as well. And I have my writing and things like that, and my blogs and on my posts. So on my Instagram right now is a pretty good hub to find all the stuff that I am putting out there.
Well, great. Well, thank you, Tim. Thank you for the energy that you're putting out into the world. This is, amazing. And if, like you said, if more of us lived in the flow, what a happier, peaceful world we would be living in, right? Because I know when I'm living in the flow, I can't wipe the smile off my face. It feels so good, right? And so when you can sense the energy of people who are in that state, and it just feels so good. And I do thank you for all that you're doing and for coming on the show today. This has been such a really nice conversation. So thank you so much, Tim. This has been a pleasure.
Yeah, it was great meeting you, great connecting with you. And it's such a pleasure for us to connect. So thank you for creating the show and putting me on it.
You deserve to navigate your life in alignment with health, happiness, and abundance. To learn more about the services that I provide, including Beyond Quantum Healing Hypnosis, EFT tapping, and the Emotion Code, visit my website at www.theexistentialempath.com.